Picture this. You're sitting in an important meeting, the room is full, your manager is at the head of the table, you glance to your left and the person beside you is clearly asleep, head tilted, eyes closed, completely out. And instead of getting a sharp elbow or a horrified look from the boss, nobody says anything at all. The meeting continues. The sleeping colleague is left entirely alone. In most offices in the West, that scene ends with an uncomfortable conversation about professionalism and probably a note in someone's file. In Japan, it's a completely ordinary Tuesday. The sleeping colleague isn't being disrespectful. They're demonstrating something. They're showing the room that they've been working so hard, pushing themselves so completely that their body is demanding rest even here, even now, and that in a culture that prizes dedication and sustained effort above almost anything else, is quietly admired. This practice has a name, Inemuri. It translates roughly as being present while sleeping, and it's a real, recognized, and culturally sanctioned feature of Japanese working life. Not a joke, not a myth, not something that used to be true and faded away. You can see it on trains, in offices, in libraries, in cafes, and at work desks across the country right now, today. Let me be straight with you before we go further. This isn't a claim that all Japanese workers nap freely with zero consequence, or that Japan has entirely figured out the sleep at work equation. The culture is complicated and some workplaces are stricter than others. What's genuinely true and genuinely interesting is that the underlying attitude toward rest and fatigue in Japan is completely different from the West, and that difference has real implications for health, productivity, and daily well-being that go far beyond who's asleep at the conference table. Today, I'll walk you through 7 things this habit reveals about a different, smarter relationship with rest. Stay with me until number 5, because it's where the science completely reverses what most Western workplaces have been getting wrong for decades. Let's get into it. Number 1. In Japan, being seen asleep at work reads as dedication rather than disrespect. To understand why, you have to understand what sleeping in public actually communicates in the Japanese cultural context. In the West, falling asleep somewhere you're supposed to be awake and present signals disengagement. You're checked out. You don't care enough to stay awake. It's a performance failure. In Japan, the cultural logic is different. If you're so tired that you're falling asleep at your desk or in a meeting, the assumed cause is that you've been working so intensely, putting in so many hours and investing yourself so completely in your job that your body is simply overriding your efforts to stay alert. You're not lazy. You're spent. And spent, in a culture where sustained effort and loyalty to the company are among the highest values, is the right direction to be spent in. The term Inemuri preserves this nuance with precision, being present while sleeping. The key word is present. The person who Inemuri at a meeting hasn't left. They haven't gone to a couch in the break room. They've stayed in the room at their seat, upright enough to snap back if needed. They are, in a specific technical sense, still participating, still available, still there. This framing neatly sidesteps the Western binary of awake and engaged versus asleep and absent. Inemuri is a third state, resting while present, and culturally that earns a pass that simply vanishing into a couch for 20 minutes would not. Here's the shift. The real insight here isn't to start napping in your meetings. It's to question the assumption that physical stillness and open eyes are the only valid markers of productivity and dedication. They're convenient to measure. They're not the same thing as the actual work. Number 2. Inemuri treats tiredness as a real physical fact rather than a character defect. In most Western workplaces, being tired is something you manage privately. You get a coffee, you push through, you absolutely do not let it show, because visible fatigue reads as not being up to the job. You're expected to appear perpetually alert, energized, and ready, regardless of how little you slept, how many hours you've already put in, or how many back-to-back meetings you've sat through. This creates a specific kind of performance, a workplace where everyone is pretending to be more alert than they are, pushing through fatigue and declining cognitive function behind a maintained appearance of engagement. The performance continues, the work suffers, and nobody says anything because saying something would require admitting that you're tired. Inemuri doesn't pretend. If your body is tired, it rests. Not for long, not dramatically, but factually. The fatigue is acknowledged rather than masked. and acknowledging a real physical state is always the first step to actually addressing it rather than just managing its appearance. There's also an important accountability built into the practice. If a worker is visibly Inemuri at their desk day after day, it eventually prompts a real conversation not about their character, but about their workload. Are they being asked to do too much? Are they sleeping enough? Is something out of balance? The visibility of the fatigue makes it a manageable fact rather than a shameful secret. Here's the shift. In your own daily life, practice naming your energy level honestly rather than performing alertness when you don't have it. A 20-minute rest taken openly and honestly is more restorative and more productive than 3 hours of pushing through behind a maintained performance. Honesty about tiredness is the first step to actually fixing it. Number 3. The science behind napping is not ambiguous, and workplaces that ignore it are leaving real performance on the table. Researchers have studied napping and cognitive performance in enough detail now that this is not a contested area. Short sleep periods in the range of 10 to 20 minutes produce measurable improvements in alertness, reaction time, decision-making, and error rates in the hours that follow. This is not a gentle or marginal effect. Studies at NASA, at major universities, and in various professional contexts have documented it clearly enough that the argument for the power nap is effectively settled in the research. What happens in a short nap is that the brain enters the early stages of sleep, where it processes recent information, clears out the buildup of adenosine, the chemical that creates the physical sensation of sleepiness, and essentially resets the alertness system. You wake from a 10-minute nap meaningfully sharper than you were before it. You enter a long post-lunch meeting half an hour later, running on a refreshed system rather than a depleted one. Japanese workplaces that tolerate Inemuri, whether or not they ever articulated this way, are effectively capturing this benefit. Workers who catch 10 minutes at their desk in the early afternoon are performing better in the afternoon than they would have performed without that rest. The productivity benefit of the nap is real, measurable, and larger than the cost of the 10 minutes it occupies. Here's the shift. If you have a door, close it, set a timer for 15 minutes, put your head down, and rest. If you don't have a door, find a quiet corner, a car, a park bench during lunch. The 15 minutes buys you hours of better function. That trade is not even close. Number 4. Japanese commuters treat the train as an extension of the rest period. Look at any Japanese commuter train and what you see is remarkable by Western standards. A significant portion of the passengers are asleep. Standing or sitting, they close their eyes the moment the train begins to move. They nap through their commute. They wake up instinctively or are woken by the station announcement at exactly the right stop. The Western commute is typically an extension of the day's stress. Navigating traffic while anxious about being late, standing on a crowded platform, alert and tense, scrolling through emails on the train as though sitting still is wasted time that must be filled with more input. The Japanese commute napper has decided something different. The time between leaving the office and arriving home is transition time. It belongs to no one. It has no deliverable at the end of it. And so it gets used for the one thing the body most wants to do with uncommitted time, which is rest. The transition time becomes recovery time. By the time the commuter gets home, they've already begun to decompress rather than carrying the full load of the day intact all the way to the dinner table. This is an elegant and utterly cost-free reclamation of what would otherwise be lost time. You're not producing anything on the train anyway. You can rest instead and arrive somewhere meaningfully better than you left. Here's the shift. On your next commute, whether train, bus, or carpool, close your eyes for part of it. Not your phone, not a podcast. Just close your eyes and let your brain sit in quiet for 15 minutes. Notice how you arrive at the other end compared to how you usually feel when you walk in the door. Number 5. This is where the science completely reverses what most Western workplaces have been getting wrong. There's a deep irony running through the entire Western attitude toward workplace alertness. We stigmatize the 10-minute desk nap as unprofessional while simultaneously celebrating and rewarding chronic sleep deprivation. Staying at the office until midnight is admired. Sleeping 5 hours a night is worn as a badge of hustle. The person who announces they're running on 4 hours of sleep is treated as impressively committed. The person who takes a 15-minute rest is treated as unprofessional. This is exactly backwards from what the research says. Chronic sleep deprivation is catastrophically harmful to cognitive function, decision making, emotional regulation, immune function, and long-term health. The performance hit from consistently sleeping 5 hours a night is not a minor penalty you can override with willpower and coffee. It's a serious impairment that accumulates, worsens over time, and cannot be compensated for with caffeine. Sleep debt is real, and you cannot think your way out of it. A 10-minute desk nap addresses none of that structural problem. But here's the key point. In Japan, Inemuri exists inside a culture that also, historically, treated long work hours and chronic fatigue as unavoidable features of serious professional life, which is not the model to copy. The specific lesson worth taking is the underlying one. Rest is a performance tool, not a weakness. Taking rest is the act of a serious professional, not a lazy one. Here's the shift. Stop wearing your sleep debt as a badge and start treating it as the performance liability it actually is. A short nap taken deliberately is not the sign of someone who doesn't care. It is the sign of someone who understands that their brain is a biological system that requires maintenance to function at its best. Number 6. The specific length of the nap is what determines whether it helps or destroys the afternoon. This is a practical detail that most people who try desk napping get wrong, and getting it wrong turns a recovery tool into a disaster. The difference between a 10-minute nap and a 45-minute nap is not just a matter of degree. It's a qualitative difference in what happens to your brain during that time. In the first 10 to 20 minutes of sleep, the brain moves through lighter sleep stages. This is where the alertness reset happens, and where you can wake up feeling genuinely refreshed. Beyond 20 minutes, the brain begins moving into deep, slow-wave sleep. If you're woken from deep sleep, whether by an alarm or a colleague, you experience sleep inertia, that thick, disoriented, worse than before grogginess that makes you feel as though you've been hit rather than rested. You're slower, foggier, and more impaired than if you hadn't napped at all. The Japanese tradition of napping at the desk, often in an upright or slightly reclined position, naturally limits the depth of sleep. You don't fully relax into the deep stages because you're not horizontal. This turns out to be physiologically convenient. The position itself acts as a natural governor that keeps the nap in the restorative shallow zone rather than letting it tip into the groggy deep zone. The prescription is simple and specific. Set a timer for 15 to 20 minutes maximum. Stay in a position that allows light rest but not full horizontal sleep. Wake to the alarm without snoozing. The window between 12 and 2 in the afternoon is the natural post-lunch trough when the body is most receptive to a short rest. Here's the shift. Time it. 15 minutes with a hard alarm is a recovery tool. 45 minutes on a couch is an ambush. The length isn't just a preference. It determines whether you wake up sharper or substantially impaired. Number 7. What Inemuri teaches ultimately is that rest is something you practice and get better at, not just something that happens to you when you stop being busy. Most people in the West are genuinely bad at resting. They sit down to do nothing and immediately feel guilty. They close their eyes during a break and their mind races through everything waiting for them. They take a vacation and spend most of it checking messages. The absence of activity isn't rest for most modern people. It's just guilty stillness. The ability to actually rest, to genuinely switch off the active mind for a short period, to allow the brain to do its maintenance and recovery work is something that requires practice. And cultures that build short, accepted rest periods into the structure of the working day are cultures where people get better at this skill over time. Inemuri, practiced regularly on trains and at desks and in afternoon breaks, builds the capacity to rest quickly and efficiently. The Japanese commuter who falls asleep within 2 minutes of sitting down on the train isn't lucky. They've done it thousands of times. They've built the skill of dropping quickly into light rest and surfacing from it cleanly, over and over, until it became as easy as any other practiced ability. Rest is a biological necessity and a learnable skill, and the two facts together mean that practicing it deliberately and regularly builds a capacity that serves you every day for the rest of your life. Here's the shift. Try closing your eyes for 10 minutes every day this week, at the same time, in the early afternoon if possible. Don't demand sleep, just allow quiet and stillness. Within a week, you'll be dropping into light rest faster. Within a month, you'll have built a skill that most people around you don't have and will actively benefit from for decades. 7 things, and the thread running through all of them is the same one that runs through most of the habits in this series. Japan built a culture where something biologically real and practically useful got treated as legitimate rather than shameful. The result is a population that rests without guilt, recovers more quickly, and performs more consistently through long workdays than a culture that stigmatizes the nap and rewards the sleep debt. None of this means you should fall asleep in your next board meeting. The context matters enormously, and Inemuri has its own cultural rules about when and where it reads as acceptable. What you can take directly and apply right now is the underlying principle. Rest is a performance tool. A short, timed, deliberate rest in the early afternoon produces measurable improvements in what comes after it. Here's the desk rest protocol. At some point between noon and 2 today, when the natural post-lunch energy trough arrives, set a timer for 15 minutes. Find the quietest spot available to you, whether that's your office with the door closed, your car in the parking lot, a park bench if the weather allows, or simply a quiet corner somewhere removed from the main flow of people and noise. Close your eyes. Don't demand sleep. Don't lie down flat if you can help it, because the risk of tipping into deep slow-wave sleep is higher horizontal. Just allow stillness and quiet, and let your brain do whatever it does when you stop feeding it input for a few minutes. When the timer ends, don't rush straight back into demanding work. Give yourself 2 or 3 minutes of transition. Get a glass of water. Look out a window. Let the system fully resurface before you put it back under load. This transition matters more than most people realize. The grogginess some people experience after napping is often not a property of the nap itself, but of going directly from rest back to high cognitive demand without any runway in between. Do that every day this week at roughly the same time, and keep an informal track of how your afternoon focus, mood, and decision quality compare to what they usually are. Not compared to your best days when everything is going well regardless. Compared to your typical average afternoon on a typical average day. Most people who try this consistently for 5 working days find it genuinely difficult to stop. Not because it's pleasant in the moment, though it often is, but because the afternoons that follow it are measurably different from the afternoons that don't. The 15-minute rest is not a luxury reserved for people with flexible schedules or understanding employers. It is a biological maintenance window available to anyone who is willing to make it a genuine priority rather than a nice idea. Japan didn't discover something exotic. They preserved something the rest of us quietly abandoned along the way to looking perpetually busy. I'll see you in the next one.